The wind sliced across the endless Texas plains like a knife through silence, carrying with it not just the unmistakable aroma of beef slowly roasting over mesquite wood, but something far more precious and unexpected, hope itself, crystallizing in the frozen air of Christmas Eve, 1944. Behind the razor-sharp barbed wire of Camp Hearn, massive floodlights transformed the dusty ground into pools of molten silver, revealing the shadowy silhouettes of German prisoners of war standing in perfect military formation, each breath creating small clouds of vapor that disappeared into the merciless winter night. They were braced for the predictable routine that had defined their captivity for months. Another roll call echoing across the compound. Another bowl of watery stew ladled from industrial-sized pots. Another brutal reminder of their crushing defeat. But then, like a miracle descended from the star-filled Texas sky, a sound cut through the monotonous darkness that would change everything. Music. Not the thunderous beat of military drums or the haunting melodies of German marshes, but the vibrant, soul-stirring notes of a steel guitar floating on the cold air, followed by the rich, hearty laughter of American guards, and an impossible scent that made every prisoner's mouth water instantly. Barbecue. Real Texas barbecue, the kind that legends are made of. The gate creaked open with a sound that would echo in their memories forever. American guards, dressed like cowboys in their khaki uniforms, their boots clicking against the frozen ground, gestured for the prisoners to approach. Captain Jack Rowland, his weathered face telling stories of 1,000 sunsets, and his Stetson hat, tilted at just the right angle, flashed a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Good evening, fellas. I'm betting you boys came hungry tonight." The German prisoners hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Being invited anywhere by their captors seemed not just unlikely, but impossible. A cruel trick, perhaps. Karl Weiss, a 23-year-old Wehrmacht infantryman from Hamburg, who had fought desperately on the blood-soaked beaches of Omaha just 6 months earlier, stared through the wire mesh, his mind racing to understand what was happening. Now, beneath the infinite canopy of Texas stars, the very enemy who had captured him was offering plates of smoking ribs and steaming mugs of hot cider. Roland gestured toward the glowing fires, with an easy confidence that spoke of absolute power tempered by unexpected mercy. "No drills tonight, boys. Just supper. Merry Christmas." Suspicious smiles crossed weathered faces before tentative steps carried them toward the warmth. American soldiers filled tin plates to overflowing, beans swimming in rich sauce, golden corn kernels, and meat so tender it fell off the bone, glistening with barbecue sauce that caught the firelight like liquid amber. A cold bottle appeared in Carl's trembling hands. He held it up to the dancing flames and read the label that would become symbolic of everything America represented to him. Coca Cola. Warning. What happened next would shatter everything these men thought they knew about their enemies forever. He'd seen the name before on abandoned Allied supply crates scattered across European battlefields, but he'd never dared taste what seemed like forbidden fruit. The gas hissed as he opened it carefully, and when the liquid touched his tongue, it was like discovering an entirely new dimension of sensation. Sweet, effervescent, foreign, yet somehow welcome. The laughter of cowboy guards mixed seamlessly with German accents as voices slowly rose in cautious but genuine conversation, barriers crumbling with each shared word and gesture. Then something truly magical happened. An American sergeant began humming Silent Night in English, and to everyone's amazement, German voices joined in with Stille Nacht, the original version their mothers had sung to them as children. The two languages wove together under the Texas night sky like threads in an invisible tapestry, creating harmony where there should have been only discord. For those precious few hours that would be remembered for decades, the war simply vanished at the fence line. Carl looked up at the brilliant Texas stars, as bright as the Christmas candles his mother had lit in their Hamburg home before the world went mad, and realized something profound. He had never felt more free, not even when he wore his nation's uniform with pride. The shocking truth behind America's secret weapon that no one saw coming. But this miraculous evening was built on the ruins of everything these men had been taught to believe about their captors. From the moment German prisoners first learned they were being shipped to America, terror had gripped their hearts like ice. Whispered rumors spread through captured columns trudging across France and North Africa. The Americans are mechanical savages who will work us to death or leave us to starve in desert camps. The Nazi propaganda machine had painted vivid, horrifying pictures of America as a land of heartless industrial monsters ruled by greed and chaos, where human life meant nothing. Karl Weiss remembered with crystal clarity a propaganda leaflet his unit had received just months before his capture. It showed a grotesque caricature of an American soldier, a cigar-chomping giant with a whip in one massive hand and a sack of gold in the other, standing over the broken bodies of German prisoners. "You will die in their camps." The leaflet had warned in bold, threatening letters. "They do not honor prisoners. They know nothing of mercy." Yet when Karl stepped off the train at Camp Hearn, Texas, blinking in the harsh sunlight, absolutely nothing fit that terrifying narrative. He saw clean barracks arranged in orderly rows like a well-planned town. Paved roads stretched between buildings. There were even carefully tended gardens with flowers blooming, despite the season. American officers stood with clipboards and friendly expressions, not rifles and scowls. Guards offered water and fresh bread, not blows and curses. "Name?" a young sergeant asked in a calm, professional tone that carried no hint of malice. "Karl Weiss," he replied, using his real name for the first time in months. "Welcome to Texas," the man replied with a genuine smile that would haunt Karl's dreams for years to come. That single sentence alone shattered everything Karl thought he knew about the world. Across the camp, other prisoners shared his bewilderment and growing wonder. Oberleutnant Franz Mueller, a former Luftwaffe pilot whose fighter plane had been shot down over Britain, wrote in his carefully hidden diary, "They feed us like human beings, not animals. The guards actually joke with us during work details. One even apologized when their coffee was cold this morning. If this is captivity, then we have entered some parallel universe where the laws of war don't apply." The most devastating revelation: why America's greatest victory had nothing to do with weapons. The greatest shock wasn't the physical comfort, it was the preservation of human dignity in a place where dignity should have been impossible. Even as prisoners of war, they were allowed to organize choirs that filled the evening air with music. They held classes where former professors taught literature and mathematics to young soldiers hungry for knowledge. They painted elaborate murals on the walls of their barracks, transforming military buildings into galleries of hope and creativity. One camp official even arranged for a magnificent Christmas tree to be cut from a nearby ranch and transported to the camp, where it was decorated with bits of foil carefully saved from ration tins, creating ornaments that caught the light like tiny stars. Karl found himself wrestling with contradictions that threatened to overwhelm his understanding of reality. His comrades had been indoctrinated to believe that Americans were weak because they loved luxury and comfort over strength and sacrifice. But here in the heart of Texas, he witnessed luxury paired seamlessly with incredible strength. The people who had systematically dismantled the mighty Wehrmacht weren't cruel conquerors drunk on victory. They were confident victors secure in their power. The irony cut deeper than any blade. Germany's war machine had operated on fear, intimidation, and rigid discipline. America seemed to run on generosity, abundance, and an almost casual confidence that spoke of unlimited resources and unshakable resolve. As Karl looked out over the camp's fence toward the endless open fields stretching to the horizon, he began to wonder which side had truly won the more meaningful, lasting victory, the one that would echo through history, not as conquest, but as an example of what civilization could achieve when power was tempered with mercy. The numbers that revealed America's most closely guarded secret: by late 1943, the United States had quietly become the world's largest guardian of Axis prisoners, a fact that was carefully hidden from the American public, who might have questioned the enormous expense. Trains carrying thousands upon thousands of captured soldiers rolled across the American heartland day and night, cutting through Kansas wheat fields that stretched beyond the horizon, across Oklahoma plains where oil derricks stood like mechanical sentries, and into the vast, seemingly infinite expanse of Texas. Texas had something precious that the war effort desperately needed: room to spare. Its endless open land, bone-dry climate that minimized disease, and robust rail lines made it the perfect location for housing massive prisoner camps. Between 1943 and 1946, the Lone Star State would house nearly 70,000 Axis prisoners, mostly Germans, with smaller but significant numbers of Italians and Austrians who had followed their German allies into defeat. Karl Weiss's incredible journey began in a makeshift holding camp in Southampton, England, where prisoners huddled together in overcrowded tents, sharing wild rumors about their ultimate destination. He was loaded aboard a Liberty ship packed with other defeated soldiers, men who had once marched confidently across Europe, believing themselves part of an unstoppable war machine. During the voyage, they were allowed on deck just once each day for fresh air, escorted by armed guards who seemed oddly relaxed, casually smoking cigarettes and joking about baseball scores that meant nothing to their German charges. The voyage across the treacherous North Atlantic took nearly 3 weeks of churning seas and cramped quarters. When the ship finally steamed into New York Harbor on a gray morning thick with fog, the prisoners saw the Statue of Liberty rising from the mist like a ghost from another world. Some wept silently, others laughed with bitter irony, but all understood they were witnessing something that would change them forever. From New York, the men were herded onto trains with drawn blinds, but gaps between the wooden slats revealed glimpses of something none of them had expected: clean towns bustling with activity, busy people going about normal lives, absolutely no rubble from bombing raids, no burned-out ruins marking the landscape of war. America remained completely untouched by the global conflict that had consumed their homeland. It looked vibrantly, impossibly alive. The moment everything changed, when enemies became something else entirely. Finally, after days of rhythmic train wheels clicking over steel tracks, the locomotive hissed to a dramatic stop outside a small Texas town whose name they would never forget. A weathered wooden sign by the railroad tracks read simply, "Camp Hearn, U.S. Army." Captain Jack Rowland, who oversaw prisoner intake that memorable week, watched thoughtfully as the men stepped off the railroad cars, blinking in the harsh Texas sunlight. Rowland had been a successful rancher before Pearl Harbor dragged him into uniform. A man of few words but steady, reliable judgment honed by years of dealing with unpredictable weather, stubborn livestock, and the endless challenges of frontier life. To him, these German soldiers weren't monsters or heroes. They were simply workers. And in Texas, good workers were always valuable, regardless of their accents or the uniforms they had worn. Get them cleaned up, fed properly, and issued fresh clothes, he told his sergeant with the matter-of-fact tone of a man assigning routine chores. They'll be in the cotton fields by Monday morning, earning their keep like everyone else. What the prisoners saw next would haunt their understanding of power, defeat, and human nature for the rest of their lives. The camp itself looked more like a carefully planned small town than any prison they could have imagined. Neat rows of whitewashed barracks lined gravel streets that were actually maintained and swept clean. There was a fully equipped hospital with real doctors and nurses, a canteen stocked with supplies, and even a small but well-organized library filled with books in multiple languages. Each prisoner compound included its own mess hall and recreation area complete, with volleyball nets and soccer fields, where men could remember what it felt like to play rather than fight. When the prisoners got their first good look at the American guards, they noticed something that shattered their final preconceptions. These men didn't look hardened, cruel, or consumed with hatred for their charges. Many wore cowboy boots beneath their regulation uniforms, and quite a few spoke with southern drawls, so thick and musical that the Germans initially struggled to understand them, though the friendly tone needed no translation. The meal that revealed the true nature of American power, that first evening in captivity, Carl and his bunkmates were served beef stew with actual chunks of meat floating in rich gravy, fresh bread still warm from the ovens, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. He sat in stunned silence for a long time, mechanically eating food that was better than anything he'd tasted in months of military rations. before finally whispering to his friend Hans, "If this is captivity, then perhaps freedom is something completely different from what we thought we understood." Outside their barracks windows, the Texas sun dipped toward the western horizon, painting the enormous sky in shades of gold and deep crimson that seemed to stretch forever. The camp loudspeaker played a country tune, something about home and lost love that transcended language barriers. For the first time since his capture on that bloody French beach, Carl fell asleep without the gnawing fear that had become his constant companion. The statistics that proved America's secret weapon was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Behind the fences and barbed wire lay a story told in numbers so staggering they defied imagination and challenged everything anyone thought they knew about the conduct of war. By the final surrender in 1945, more than 425,000 Axis prisoners of war were being held on American soil, a number that represented entire armies, complete divisions of men who had once marched under enemy flags. Of that massive total, nearly 70,000 were housed in Texas alone, spread across 30 large main camps and hundreds of smaller satellite work details, scattered throughout the state like seeds planted in fertile ground. Each major camp was essentially a self-contained ecosystem, a functioning community with its own rhythm and culture. Camp Hearn alone sprawled across 240 carefully organized acres, housing over 4,800 men in rows of military barracks that were kept scrupulously clean and well-maintained. 6 watchtowers stood at strategic points around the perimeter, but they were rarely manned for anything beyond routine observation, a telling detail about the relationship between captors and captives. The Geneva Convention had established minimum standards for prisoner treatment, but America consistently went far beyond those requirements, creating a situation that would reshape international understanding of what was possible even in wartime. German prisoners received exactly the same caloric intake as active-duty U.S. soldiers, a substantial 3,200 calories per day that included hearty breakfasts of eggs and oatmeal, substantial lunches featuring stew and fresh bread, and dinners of beans, potatoes, and meat whenever available. Coffee flowed freely throughout the day, and seconds were always available for men who wanted them. The contrast with other theaters of war was stark and deliberately maintained. Captured American soldiers in German camps averaged less than 120 calories per day and frequently died of starvation-related diseases. Many who survived returned home as walking skeletons, their bodies permanently damaged by months or years of deliberate starvation. The hidden economic war, how America weaponized abundance. The economics of the prisoner system revealed truths about American industrial capacity that enemy intelligence services struggled to comprehend or believe. By 1944, prisoner labor in Texas alone contributed an estimated 20 million man-hours to the American war economy, harvesting cotton that would be cotton, uniforms and parachutes, building roads that would transport military supplies, cutting timber for construction projects, and repairing machinery that kept the war effort running smoothly. Each prisoner earned 80 cents per day for their work wages that were credited to individual accounts they could use to purchase cigarettes, soap, writing paper, and other personal items from well-stocked camp canteens. This wasn't charity or accident. It was calculated psychological warfare of the most sophisticated kind. The moral calculus was deliberately clear and consistently applied. America could afford to be generous because American power was so overwhelming that generosity posed no threat to security. Even the statistics of death in captivity revealed profound truths about the nature of different forms of government and military organization. Of the 425,000 Axis prisoners held in the United States throughout the war, fewer than 1% died in captivity, and most of those deaths resulted from accidents or pre-existing medical conditions rather than deliberate neglect or abuse. In Soviet prisoner camps, by stark contrast, the death rate for German POWs exceeded 35%, a number that reflected both the brutality of the Eastern Front and Stalin's deliberate policy of using prisoner deaths as a weapon of war. In British custody, approximately 3% of German prisoners died, a rate that reflected the strain of wartime shortages, but also Britain's commitment to maintaining civilized standards even under extreme pressure. The number for American camps was so low, it initially startled German high command officials when they received Red Cross reports, leading some to dismiss the statistics as allied propaganda. The daily reality that redefined what captivity could mean. The morning Texas sun was absolutely merciless, capable of burning away the night's chill within minutes and transforming the camp into a furnace that tested everyone's endurance. Carl Weiss stepped out of Barracks 14, clutching his dented mess tin, joining the slow-moving line of men that stretched toward the canteen like a river of humanity seeking sustenance. The smell of frying bacon and brewing coffee hit him with the force of a physical blow, triggering memories of peacetime breakfasts that seemed to belong to another lifetime. Inside the mess hall, American cooks, most of them regular enlisted men doing KP duty, were already cracking jokes with the easy humor that seemed to characterize everything about these Texans. "Morning, Fritz. Try not to burn your tongue on the coffee this time," one of them called out with a grin that showed absolutely no malice. Just the kind of casual friendliness that was becoming routine. The Germans laughed awkwardly in response. It remained impossible to determine when these Texans were being serious and when they were simply exhibiting the kind of rough friendliness that seemed to define their culture. Carl received his breakfast scrambled eggs that were actually fresh, cornbread still warm from the ovens, a crisp slice of apple that must have come from somewhere far away, and coffee so black and strong it could have been used to strip paint. He carried his loaded tray outside and found a seat on a wooden bench beneath a long awning that provided blessed shade. For several minutes, he simply sat and observed the surreal scene around him. The camp looked almost exactly like a civilian work camp rather than a military prison. Men moved freely within the compound boundaries, chatting in small groups, some playing cards, others writing letters on precious paper purchased from the canteen with their earnings. The Christmas miracle that changed the rules of war forever. By December 1944, Camp Hearn had settled into rhythms that would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier. The brutal dust storms of summer had given way to mild winter weather that made outdoor work almost pleasant, and the cotton fields beyond the wire stood empty and quiet, waiting for spring planting. For most of the 4,000 German prisoners, Christmas meant homesickness so intense, it was almost physical pain-sharp reminders of wives left behind, children who were growing up without fathers, and a homeland that was now under constant bombardment from Allied air forces. But for the Texans running the camp, Christmas meant something entirely different: barbecue. And in Texas, barbecue wasn't merely a method of cooking meat. It was a social institution, a celebration of community, and a demonstration of hospitality that transcended all other considerations. 2 weeks before Christmas, Major William R. Todd, the camp's commanding officer, called a staff meeting that would change military history. "Gentlemen," he announced in his calm, measured voice, "we're having a Christmas barbecue this year, and I'm personally inviting every prisoner in this camp to join us." The room fell completely silent. One guard finally found his voice. "Sir, you mean they'll actually be eating with us? At the same tables?" Todd nodded firmly. "That's exactly what I mean. There's no better way to keep men calm and cooperative than to treat them like the human beings they are." What happened next would prove that sometimes the most powerful weapons in war aren't made of steel and explosives. The plan was simple in concept, but revolutionary in execution. On Christmas Eve, Americans and German prisoners would share one massive outdoor meal under the infinite Texas sky, breaking bread together as if nationality and uniform meant nothing at all. The prisoners were initially skeptical, their minds automatically searching for hidden motives or cruel tricks. When rumors first began spreading through the barracks, many dismissed them as wishful thinking or deliberate misinformation designed to raise false hopes that would be brutally crushed. But when supply trucks began arriving loaded with sides of beef, sacks of flour, cases of beans, and wooden crates stenciled Coca Cola in red letters, disbelief slowly transformed into something approaching cautious hope mixed with genuine curiosity. The moment that proved America had already won the war that mattered most. On the morning of December 24th, 1944, the rich, complex aroma of mesquite smoke began rolling through Camp Hearn like a physical presence, carrying with it the promise of something unprecedented in the history of warfare. The Americans had been awake since long before dawn, tending massive brick-lined grilling pits filled with ribs and brisket that would feed thousands. Country music played softly from a radio positioned near the main mess hall, and even the most disciplined guards seemed relaxed, moving with the easy confidence of men who knew they held all the cards and could afford to be generous with their winnings. Carl Weiss stood at the barbed wire fence, watching in fascination as Sergeant Billy Jenkins, the red-haired Texan who had shared Lucky Strike cigarettes during work details, waved him forward with a gesture that seemed to dissolve months of military protocol in an instant. "Come on, Fritz. Grab yourself a plate before all the good stuff disappears," Jenkins called out, his voice carrying the kind of genuine warmth that couldn't be faked or manufactured. Carl hesitated for only a heartbeat before walking through the gate that had symbolized his captivity, suddenly realizing that the barriers existed more in his mind than in the physical world. The guards barely glanced at the stream of German prisoners moving freely through what should have been secure perimeters. There was no shouting, no barking of orders, no visible tension, just the sounds of sizzling meat, easy laughter, and multiple languages slowly blending into a symphony of human connection that transcended every artificial division that war had created. Long wooden tables had been arranged beneath strings of Christmas lights that twinkled like terrestrial stars. Germans and Americans sat side by side without apparent discomfort, sharing food, trading cigarettes, and teaching each other words and languages that had been used to issue orders for killing just months before. "Danke," one guard said proudly, carefully holding up a bottle of Coca Cola as if it were a trophy. "You got it perfect," Carl replied in his carefully practiced English, grinning with genuine pleasure for the first time since his capture. Then something happened that would echo through the decades and reshape how the world understood the true nature of victory and defeat. Someone from the American side began playing Silent Night on a harmonica, the melody floating across the gathering like a benediction. Within seconds, German voices joined in, singing Stille Nacht in soft, hesitant tones that gradually grew stronger and more confident. The two versions merged and intertwined, English and German lyrics weaving together under the vast Texas night sky like threads in an invisible tapestry that connected not just voices, but hearts and souls that had been told they were eternal enemies. For those few precious hours that would be remembered and retold for generations, the war simply ceased to exist at the fence line. Prisoners forgot their uniforms, and the guards forgot their rifles. All that remained was the fundamental warmth of shared food, crackling fires, and the recognition of common humanity that no amount of propaganda could completely destroy. The letter that revealed how victory could transform even the victors later that evening. As Major Todd walked the camp perimeter with his young adjutant, both men struggling to process what they had witnessed, the younger officer voiced the question that was haunting them both. "Sir, do you think anyone in Berlin would believe what happened here tonight?" Todd paused in his walking, looking up at the star-filled sky that seemed to stretch into infinity, and smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had discovered something profound about the nature of power and mercy. "Son," he replied slowly, "if this whole damn world ran on barbecue and genuine goodwill instead of bullets and hatred, we wouldn't be fighting this war in the first place." That night, as Carl lay in his narrow bunk with the lingering sense of mesquite smoke and barbecue sauce still clinging to his prison clothes, he realized something that would change his understanding of victory, defeat, and human nature forever. His captors had shown him more genuine mercy and human kindness in a single evening than his own officers had demonstrated in years of military service. He closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness, "Fro Weihnachten," not to anyone in particular, but to the silence, to the night, to the strange and wonderful country that had treated him not as a defeated enemy to be crushed, but as a human being worthy of dignity and respect. The victory that mattered most had nothing to do with tanks, planes, or bombs. It was won with plates of barbecue, bottles of Coca Cola, and the revolutionary idea that even in war, mercy could be a demonstration of strength rather than weakness. The war would continue for several more months, but for the men of Camp Hearn, the most important battle had already been decided, not by superior firepower, but by the radical notion that treating enemies with humanity might be the most devastating weapon of all.